And I want to go to you, Mark Leibovich. I'm having a hard time setting my own expectations for what to expect going forward, because as we've already seen, Donald Trump is not yet even in office, but he's already trying to force people to accommodate him, force institutions to accommodate him, force big business to accommodate him, like Meta today saying that they're going to get away or do away with fact checking. You can say that the fact checking never was all that successful to begin with, but at the same time, the message that Zuckerberg and that company is sending is pretty clear.
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, I think if you want to sort of set expectations here, I mean, you can go as far, to the bad side of this as you want. But basically, we can see how he wants to amass power. He's obviously amassed total power within the Republican Party. That's usually one of the first checks and balances that a president has. He obviously won the popular vote in the last election. That itself gives you a great deal of power. The presidency itself is an extremely powerful office with all kinds of powerful prerogatives. What we've seen recently is certainly, as you said, big business, whether it's Meta, whether it's journalism, whether it's institutions like, say, ABC or the Washington Post or what have you, seem to be bending towards him, which seems to be very much in keeping with what could be an extremely aggressive presidency of someone who doesn't look like there's any sort of traditional mechanism that could stop him if, in fact, he wants to go and, invade countries or just sort of violate even more norms than he did the last time around.
On that note, and especially today, Jonathan, as we're watching the funeral begin in Washington for President Carter, I started by saying there's almost no parallels between the two men. They were both outsiders. There is one more parallel there, but outsider to describe Jimmy Carter and outsider to describe Donald Trump, those two words seem to be defined differently based on those two men. How do you kind of square that circle today, watching this and trying to set your own expectations for how to cover Donald Trump as he comes into office?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to be an outsider. So Jimmy Carter was an outsider in saying, we need a government as good as its people. That was his line in 1976. He wanted to try to restore decency that had been lost during Vietnam and Watergate, the decency, integrity, respect for the law. Watergate was a lot worse than I think some people understand. And we went, journalists are nervous right now. During Watergate, Nixon wiretapped us. Okay, so in some limited ways, we have been here before. But Jimmy Carter was inspiring to the better angels of their nature in that campaign. Trump is the opposite. He appeals to fear and hate. And he uses those fears as an outsider to scapegoat people, whether it's migrants or CEOs who aren't doing his bidding. Both of them are, strangely enough, the richest people in the world and the poorest people in the world are both putty in his hands, at least right now. The good news is, I know people think he's going to be there for the rest of his life, but the 22nd Amendment is not vague. He is not president for life. He is term limited now, and he's a lame duck starting January 20th. And there will be political weaknesses to him that we don't see quite yet that his critics will be able to exploit. So the idea that he is now going to be able to completely consolidate power and shut down any opposition is inconsistent with the fate of two-term presidents.
I understand that, and I think that is
second term.
100% a correct statement to make, and also a correct setting of expectations, because it is only 4 years. How much can you do in 4 years? I guess I'm more nervous about, and I'll give this to you, Aaron David Miller, about where we go in terms of a shared set of values, a shared truth. We've already been living in this post-truth landscape now for a little while, but it seems to be, or it is getting worse by the day. It's getting harder to differentiate between what is true and what is not, because Americans don't trust anybody any longer. They don't trust people like me. They don't trust the media. They don't trust our institutions. They don't trust experts. They don't trust doctors. They don't trust educators. They trust people that they see on social media. But now that social media is saying we're not going to fact check anybody, again, I mean, it wasn't that successful to begin with, but taking away yet another guardrail, what do we do when there's no shared truth? And it's even worse than it is today.
Right. First of all, Katie, thanks for having me, and Happy New Year, even under these circumstances. Look, I think it's a serious challenge to self-governance. How can you have effective self-governance when you have millions of Americans who are in fundamental disagreement with others, not over the direction of policy, but about empirical reality? I mean, how can you have good governance when citizens shed their contract out, literally, rather than assuming responsibility for their own education and getting to know things? They've contracted their politics out, either their favorite television studio or their favorite commentator, or largely expressing themselves very often incredibly inappropriately in social media. So that I think is a huge challenge. I also worry about something else, and that is this: the capacity of this nation, in which I have extraordinary hope and faith in, to grieve together and or to celebrate together. I'm wondering, I really wonder, I was 12 when Jack Kennedy was shot. I'll never forget the day or the moment. The nation grieved. There was a shared sense of values, a shared commitment and a shared purpose. And the 60s were turbulent times, and yet there was a profound faith in institutions. Just one other point, October 22nd, 1962, Kennedy addresses the nation, the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis. He spoke for an hour. After he finished speaking, at the most fraught moment in the Cold War, with two nations poised on the possibility of a nuclear exchange, the networks literally went back to normal programming. That meant my parents had to listen to what Jack Kennedy had to say for an hour. There was not a bank of CNN, MSNBC, Fox journalists telling the viewers, telling my parents what they should think. The president should have said this, they should have said that. So I worry greatly about that, because I think, America's not a big ATM machine. People have serious responsibilities and obligations of citizenship.
Yeah, I wonder that, but yes, I agree with all that. But Mark, I want to go back to just that same point, which is if Donald Trump is controlling the levers of power and the levers of communication and information, I just don't know what that means going forward, and where and how a competing political party cuts through that. If Donald Trump is getting social media to let anyone say whatever they want, let anyone find whatever truth they want, if he's getting the courts to agree with him or to at least do his bidding, as we're seeing with Judge Eileen Cannon, maybe they didn't have a conversation, but it was certainly very clear that Donald Trump didn't want this special counsel report out there. He made it clear. He said so. And then also the way he works with Congress and lawmakers, telling them what to do, intervening when he doesn't agree with something, even intervening before he won the White House with the immigration bill. When you have control over all of those avenues of our life and the way we think, the way we consume, what we believe, how do you, as a Democrat or anyone else, or Republican that wants to run against them, independent, how do you cut through that? How do you find a way to get your voice heard, to get your opinions out there, your beliefs, your goals?
Yeah, obviously, the Republican Party has had no success whatsoever trying to do this. This is a party that systematically over the last 8 years has completely, with a few small exceptions, now very marginal exceptions, given themselves over to his vision. So, look, if there was ever a president who was in need of robust checks and balances, whether from within his own party, within his own administration, within, certainly the media, it's Donald Trump. This is someone who will go as far as he can go unless he is stopped. And look, it looked like he has a whole glide path through a lot of what used to be very formidable institutions, beginning with his own party, then there's the courts and everything you just mentioned, to do all kinds of things that are antithetical to the basic values of America. So, yeah, you could certainly draw out a worst case scenario, and it could be starting right now. But certainly, all of the sort of the contours are there to allow him to do it if he wanted to.